Wow, this was so interesting reading The Shadow Out of Time again. I don't
Yes.
know. Because I have read it before. I've read it before, but for some reason it didn't lodge in my mind. Coming back to it
Hmm.
this time, I think it may be one of my favorites of Lovecraft's work.
It's absolutely one of my favorites. Yeah,
It's really
absolutely.
good. It's
Yeah.
really good, isn't it? It has what I'm surprised by. It has a lot of the stuff that people would consider to be classically Lovecraft. Even some of people, some of the stuff that people might consider some of the stylistic sins of
Mm,
Lovecraft. You know,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
somehow this one makes them work. It just fits. Everything fits together. Everything works together. Like, there's that wonderful thing where the protagonist, Peasley, Nathaniel Wingate Peasley, professor of Miskatonic, he does that
By the
weird.
way, I have a thing, just to
Uh,
interrupt.
yes.
I think this could actually be quite successfully adapted into a movie or something if you
Oh.
made the story as it exists, like the first two acts, and then you added a
Mm.
final act. But I'm just amused by the idea of a movie where Nicolas Cage, for instance, plays Nathaniel Wingate Peasley.
You know, thinking about the last, because it's very strictly like separated into thirds, isn't it? It's a three
Mm,
act story, this one. The
yeah.
final act, I could so see Nicolas Cage in that. I could so see someone like Nicolas Cage. Wait, because it becomes in the final act almost like a an action horror. It has elements of like an Indiana Jones story almost.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
And Cage
Nathaniel
has done stuff
Wingate.
like that.
Yes, yeah, of course, and has also been involved in Lovecraft stories, of course, having
Exactly.
been in
Yeah.
the Color Out of Space, which is not bad as it
I've yet
goes.
to see that.
I mean, I was very dubious because I think of all Lovecraft stories, if you're going to adapt, you actively choose to adapt the one where the central image is something that cannot be interpreted by
Is
human sight and
Yeah.
sense, you know,
The central image is literally unrepresentable. So
unrepresentable,
yeah.
which, they don't even really try as such in the film. They understand that it's impossible, so they just go with something weird, visually weird, and it
Hmm.
works. It really does work. It's not a bad film at all. It's quite a decent horror film.
I always thought that if you were going to film The Color Out of Space, you'd have to film it in black and white, so
Yeah.
you could
Oh.
have characters reacting to the color on
Mhm.
screen, and you could show the color on screen, but the
Mhm.
audience would understand that they can't see it. That's the closest you
Yes.
could get to recreating the effect in prose on screen.
Yeah.
But
It's
no, they just chose to go ahead and do it in
Yeah.
color.
Just do it. Yeah. I'm really shocked. I mean, when I first heard they were doing it, I was immediately, no, that's not going to work. Never going to be able to do it. It's an impossible story to adapt in that regard, like visually. But actually, they just ignore that element of it. The fact
Mm,
that the color is something from beyond our assumptions of what color is. I mean, I love in the original story where Lovecraft really goes to town trying to tell you that even the word color doesn't really work. It's
yes, there's the wonderful phrase that he uses. It was only by analogy that we called it color at all,
yes,
which is it's great.
it is
It's
great.
the
It is
sort of thing
really
that
good.
attracts you to this guy when you're reading it for the
Yeah.
first time as a young person. It's yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that is quintessential Lovecraft, isn't it? The thing which you cannot really conceive of or describe within the parameters of language. I really kind of love that. There's a little bit of that in this story, but this one, the concepts are really specific in this one, and it works. It really beautifully works. I love in this one that element of, regardless of what alien monstrosities he describes, and he really does in this one. He goes full bore. The creatures of Yith, the alien intelligences from millions of years in Earth's past are very
Mm.
specifically detailed in terms of their anatomies, and they're very weird and they're very unsettling in terms of what they look like. The real horror of this one is time.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, time is just
concept of time.
yeah, it's just time is just inherently horrifying in this story.
Yes.
It just is just the passage of time,
And
the
like
immensity of it is just
the immensity of it, and the fact that human beings don't have a very good grasp of it as a species, which, because of the way Peasley is hijacked and is basically catapulted all over time itself mentally. It demonstrates that time is like, I mean, he even says at one point that he references quantum physics. So it's very clear to me that when Lovecraft was writing this, he'd been reading up on the latest research into Einstein's theories and quantum physics, and the way time had basically become. He talks about how it's been relegated to a dimension,
hmm.
a mere dimension. I think he even uses the word a mere dimension, and that for Peasley, but also for Lovecraft, is in and of itself an article of horror.
Well, he even name checks Einstein specifically. There's a bit
Yes.
where he's talking about his because there's this tension all the way through the story of after his initial episode where he
Mm,
seems to his intelligence, his personality seems to be replaced by somebody or something else, and he
yes.
experiences that as a period of amnesia. He sort of
Hmm.
he has these weird episodes, passes out, wakes up 5 years later, very much like Johnny
Mm.
Smith actually in the Dead Zone,
It,
thinking about it.
very much,
Um,
actually. Yes, I never. Yeah, and in
yeah,
the midst of a lecture, by the way. So he
yes,
has his first episode whilst he's giving a lecture because he's a professor of economics at
ex-
Miskatonic,
this
which
is
is
one of
very
the
interesting.
this is one of the things about this story that really fascinates me.
Isn't
But
that
yeah, he
fascinating? I mean, in a way, it's almost comedic because he's a professor of economics, yet because he is a classic Lovecraftian academic, he also knows about like antiquity and occultism, and it's just something you do if you're at Miskatonic, right? If you are an academic in a Lovecraft story, then it's like if you do any of the arts or humanities, you have to have critical theory as a module. If you're an academic in a Lovecraft story, somewhere along the line, you do a course in antiquity and ancient literature and occultism, etc., etc. You just know this stuff, right?
it feels like that. You're being a mite unfair,
I
I
am.
think,
I'm. I am.
because
I am. I'm
um,
exaggerating for effect, but I love the fact that he has the first episode in the midst of a lecture, and for him, it is very, for at least for a period, it is lost time.
yeah,
So he
well,
comes out of it so many years later, and he's actually halfway through a sentence of his lecture.
and that sentence is wonderful. That refers to actual political economy of the time, by the way, which is something I
Yes.
hope we'll get onto. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
he does learn about folklore, and he gets into the entire sort of the Necronomicon and all that stuff afterwards. But
Mhm.
he's one of the most convincingly realized, I think, of the Lovecraft protagonists, because it
Yes.
makes perfect sense that he is just this guy who's a professor of economics, and he
Mhm.
has this experience where he passes out, wakes up 5 years later. As you say, for him, no time has gone by, so he's still
Yeah.
giving his lecture on political economy. And then he discovers that for the last 5 years, as far as he knows, he's been unconscious, and
Mhm.
or this other version of him, this secondary personality, as he keeps calling it, has been walking around in his body, doing
Yeah.
all sorts of interesting stuff, traveling to places and consulting the Necronomicon and all the
Right.
evil fictional occultic books in the Lovecraft stories. And of course, Lovecraft being Lovecraft, he mentions other people's fictional occultic books as
Yeah.
well, because they were all using each other's fictional occultic book. He
Yes.
uses the mythos of the Alton Shards and
Uh-huh.
the stuff from Clark Ashton Smith and all this. But he's what Peasley's doing is when he wakes up as himself 5 years later, he's trying to work out what this other version of him was doing during the five
Yes.
years. So he becomes acquainted with all
Uh-huh.
this stuff as a result of that, and then he starts having these dreams as he thinks of them
Yeah.
that seem incredibly convincing and
Uh-huh.
realistic, and that's how he comes to be acquainted with this sort of previously unremarked upon layer of folklore that
Yeah.
comes from the tiny number of people he's discovered who've had episodes like him. And he discovers that right the way back hundreds of years, in cases of amnesia and split personality, there's a tiny minority of people who've had experiences like him. And what they say when they talk about their experiences is that just like he did, they dropped out, disappeared mentally for 5 years, came back, and then they started having these dreams. And the dreams that they recount, the folklore that stems from those dreams, it meshes directly with the things he's dreaming about. So we have
Yeah.
a recognizably continuous phenomenon here. But of course, all the way through, he's trying to rationalize it. So what he
Uh,
does is he reasons backwards from, well, I'm I'm having these dreams because I became acquainted with the folklore when I
right.
was in the the period that I now think of as my amnesia
Hmm.
period, and I'm basing my dreams on that. And one of the ways in which he tries to rationalize it, as you say, is that he talks to other academics about it, and most of them
Yes.
are like, "You're no, I'm not talking about this." But he finds the mathematicians receptive because they say, and this gets us back to where we started with
Mm.
this digression. They say, "Oh, yeah, actually, that could be true because Professor Einstein is
Right.
reducing time to the status of a mere dimension." And
It's
it's
really
interesting, isn't it,
interesting. I mean, it's
that he
fascinating
has,
because you have so much of Lovecraft. I mean, this is one of the stories where you really get to see what a boffin Lovecraft was, right?
yeah,
There's so many disciplines here that he's drawing on. There's the psychology for one, which again would have been somewhat in its infancy at the time Lovecraft was writing, but he clearly understood certain elements of it. Quantum physics, notions of time, physics, as well as all of the antiquarian stuff, the occult imagery, fiction, mythology, etc. There's a certain, but it's never obtrusive, which it is in a lot of other Lovecraft stories. There are some other Lovecraft stories where you get the impression that he's just interested in exploring an idea that's obsessing him at the time, and the story is just a framework for it. This feels much more sincere, and also, I mean, you mentioned that Peasley's one of the more interesting Lovecraft protagonists, and yeah, that came through so strongly in this reading because he's one of the only Lovecraft protagonists who's not just cipher or a vessel for getting the story or for the ideas of the story. This guy has a life.
yes,
He's not some isolated occultist or alchemist or whatever who's gone searching for this stuff. He has it afflicted upon him.
mm,
This occurs by chance, really, just by complete chance. Um, and he has a domestic life. He has a life outside of these obsessions and outside of his
yes.
academic career. One of the most, I mean, he has an emotional life.
He
It's
has
not
a wife and 3 kids.
right. He has a wife and 3 kids. It's not remarked upon in any great detail. Lovecraft is not interested in that stuff. It's not an area that he has great interest or expertise in. So he kind of glosses over it. But it's here. It is here, and it does have an effect on Peasley himself. There's the one son, Wingate, who is the only one who sticks with him when he's having his out of body experience, and who comes and finds him a little later when he's grown up.
Yes. It is interesting because, as you say, he doesn't go into, he's not interested in exploring the emotional or the character
No,
dynamics of this really quite tragic thing that happens to the man. The
right.
man recounts it in quite dry and cold terms. That's contextualized by the fact that the text that we get
Hmm.
is Peasley writing an account of
Yeah.
what has happened to him in the light of the most recent events, and he's hoping that this account can be used by his son for purposes that are a little bit unclear. But
Hmm.
he's not writing a memoir. So the fact
Yeah.
that he doesn't go into how he feels about what happens to him is it's sort of lampshaded within the text. But even so, it is in there. Lovecraft decides to put in there that this man
It
has a family
is.
life that is destroyed by this event. He
And it's
loses his wife.
unusual. It's
Yeah, it is
very
very
unusual,
unusual.
isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
and also he even gives an account. I mean, it's very brief, but the way the wife reacts
Mm,
when the other personality takes over,
yeah.
which is with horror. I mean, she seems to be aware that on some level or another, on some unspoken level, perhaps, that there is whatever's happened, it has changed him profoundly.
Well,
Um,
she just declares that it's not him, it's somebody
yeah,
else.
it's someone
And
else, and
as
we're
we
done.
discover,
we're
she's
done,
right.
right? She's
Yeah.
that's the other thing, right? There is this really strange. I mean, in certain ways it echoes Jekyll and Hyde, but in others it's starkly different. I mean, in Jekyll and Hyde are the same guy essentially, with a slightly different face. You know, one's given license and the other isn't. They're parts of the same mind. There's a dualism inherent in the assumptions of the story, right? Because this guy's mind is not only replaced, it's actually physically dragged through time.
It's
The
abducted
whatever
and
it's
imprisoned.
abducted,
Yeah.
right, and imprisoned in another anatomy and another body.
And
One
another
of the
epoch.
but another epoch of being, yeah, in this
Yeah.
alien civilization that inhabited Earth millions of years ago, and of which there is nothing left. Barring these ruins out in obscure desert somewhere. But I find the horror inherent in that really fascinating. I mean, Lovecraft plays with this in other stories as well, this notion of minds being
He's
abducted and
very,
whatnot.
yeah, yeah.
But there
He's
tends to
very
be
interested in this.
he is
Um,
interested in this. He's got a similar interest with conflicts of identity that certain science fiction writers have, like Philip K. Dick, but he handles it in different ways. I mean, normally there's a physical element, there's a surgical element or something. Sometimes literally the brain is hijacked and put into mechanical containers or surgically
yeah.
implanted into other bodies or whatever. Here, the mind is conceptualized as a thing that exists separate to the brain, or that can be taken out of the brain, and another mind can be inserted in. And of course, he doesn't really go into detail about what the mechanism of that is. It's just that the creatures of Yith, these entities, are so phenomenally advanced in terms of the sciences and whatnot. And boy, does he
And
go into
they've,
detail about their culture. My God.
yes, and they've done this before. It's kind of easy, just parenthetically, two big major Lovecraft stories either side of this also
Mm,
treat this idea of the invading mind taking
mm,
over a different body. We have the case of Charles Dexter Ward,
of
which is
course.
before this, and we also
Hmm.
have not long after this the thing on the doorstep, which goes into that in great
Hmm.
detail. And both of those stories are much more, they're not about it, but they're much more concerned with how the substitution of one mind for another
Hmm.
inside a body affects the people around the person that it's done to. And
Yes.
both those stories are much more about family life. In Charles
Yeah.
Dexter Ward, you have Ward's relationship with his parents, with his ancestors, with
Yes, of
friends
course.
around him. So, and in the thing on the doorstep, it's about a marriage. It's the most
Yeah.
domestic and personal in many ways, and certainly the most concerned with sex of
Mm.
all Lovecraft stories. The thing on the doorstep. It's treating of the same basic idea, but in a very, very different way. This is a much more intellectual story, as you were saying. This is much more a story which is looking at some really quite deep and complex philosophical ideas. And as I was saying, the creatures themselves, the great race, as they're referred
Mm.
to in the story, it's easy to miss, but I think it's pretty clear that they are sort of mental nomads or mental migrants, because the
Right.
the creatures that they inhabit in the ancient epoch on Earth, the Rugos cones, as
Mm.
Lovecraft describes them, they're not their natural bodies. They
Right.
are creatures that existed on Earth, that those creatures inhabited and took over when they sort of seeped down to Earth from the stars, as
Yeah,
Lovecraft likes to say.
that is wonderful, isn't it? And it's easy to miss that, It is only mentioned like in one passing sentence that
Yeah,
these entities, and it's easy to miss because Lovecraft is so in love with describing the creatures and their society and their culture. I mean, that second part, that second third of the story where he goes into when Heasley is actually remembering, he's having his recollections, and it goes into such incredible detail about the creatures and the culture. It is so easy to miss that the intelligences that are operating these entities are not. This is not their original form, right? The clones are just another species that they've hijacked. This is something that they've been doing for Well, again, it's that notion of time, isn't it? These entities are from some epoch of the universe that would probably make no sense to human beings, even if it
Yeah.
could be described. It's from some timeless time, the way they operate as well, because they seem to be, whatever it was they started out as, they almost, at this point, they are creatures of intelligence exclusively. There is an implication that their original forms or whatever were destroyed eons ago, maybe in some apocalypse or some
Hmm.
invasion or whatever. Or even if that's the case, I mean, maybe this is the way they've always been. Maybe that's how they evolve, you know? Maybe they are these sort of like creatures composed entirely of abstract sentience and energy that need to hijack bodies or species or whatever. It's
And they do seem
so,
to be completely intellectual beings as well, don't they? They don't seem to
yes.
have that they're not evil. This is one of the interesting things
No.
about the story, that they're not evil or cruel. They don't even really seem to have any sort of except isolated individuals sometimes apparently try to escape death from
Yeah.
illness or whatever by stealing the bodies of other creatures. But as a race or as a society, they don't seem to have ill intent. They're
No.
just they're just exploring. They're learning, and they're doing it with a
Yeah.
sort of a complete arrogant entitlement towards the creatures. Other than them in the history of the universe that they're able to see and invade, but they're not malevolent exactly. They
Not
just
at
seem to be
all.
pure intellect and pure
even
curiosity.
even with regards to the creatures they hijack, and it's not just human beings, as is made
No.
evident. Actually one of my favorite sequences in the story is when Peasley is interacting. He's using the body that he's been supplanted into to interact with others that have had it done to them, and there are Lovecraft uses it as a way of drawing together various elements of his own mythologies and also other people. So you get entities from Venus and from other epochs of humanity. There's a Roman, I believe, at one point.
Yeah.
You
There's
know,
an African king as well. That's
so,
very interesting, isn't it? That this, I
right.
mean, I don't want to, make apologies for the old racist, but he did undergo a process of change, and
Mm,
this is very much a late tale. At this part of his life, he was changing on issues to
yeah.
do with race and politics and economics and stuff like this. And there are some neutral to positive, amazing neutral to positive mentions of black people
Yeah,
in this story. Can you
you can
can you even
tell. I,
imagine this?
even if I didn't know that the story was from the towards the latter part of his life, and in fact that makes sense with regards to the domestic politics of the story as well, because in a way you have an analogy of what happened to Lovecraft himself with regards to his own marriage in Peasley's, you know.
Yes.
It may be an expression of that because of course Lovecraft in his own marriage could not escape his own trauma, and it ultimately ended in a very, not with a bang but with a whimper, right? He ultimately just
Yeah.
retreated back to um where was it he came from? It was Boston,
Providence.
wasn't it? Providence, of course it was Providence, Rhode Island. Yeah, of course it was.
Yeah.
And they just became estranged, didn't they? And ultimately very quietly divorced,
I
very,
think
very
part of
sad.
it, he sort of couldn't handle being out in the world.
No, no.
And it's, I mean, Lovecraft is one of those writers that it's almost impossible to critically evaluate him without just straying into biology and
Mhm.
biography. I mean,
Yeah.
and author psychology. He's one of those authors that kind of just makes that unavoidable because everything is so intensely personal. And I think
So
one
about
of
him, isn't it? It's so about
yeah,
his, I mean,
but one of his most shockingly racist stories is the story "The Horror of Red Hook," which is his great story
oh,
about New York. I mean,
infamous,
it's
infamously so, right?
it's a brilliantly written story, but it
Uh-huh.
is staggeringly racist. But
Yeah.
it's his great vomiting, coughing up of his revulsion at New York,
Yeah.
and the polyglot multiracial society that he encountered. Um,
Hmm.
I think you can kind of read some of these alien utopia stroke dystopias that he wrote in detail later in life, and he did this a few times. There's the one that he creates in the story The Mound, which is one of his
Right.
ghost
That's another
stories.
one we have got to discuss at
That's
some point. I mean,
fascinating.
it will be
Yeah.
it's too I mean, there's too much to talk about to go into it here, but I that one, wow.
Yeah. But he does this in his late stories. He does this a few times where he will insert these long passages of world building about these alien societies,
Oh,
and he gets so carried away with just the
yes.
details tumbling over each other. And I think you
This is
can
it.
read this one, and possibly that one as well, as
Mhm.
kind of the other side of his reaction to seeing New York and seeing the wider society and sort of coming
Uh-huh.
out of his shell a bit, because there's a lot, Peasley, as he talks about his, and he's still at this point in the story, obviously very ambivalent about whether he
Mm.
thinks these are actually memories or confabulations or
Yes.
folklore or whatever. It exists in this uncertain zone, but he's describing this alien society that he felt anyway, that he was a captive mind in,
Uh-huh.
uh, hundreds of millions of years in the past. And he's describing, talking, as you say, he talks to the captive mind of an ancient Roman,
Uh-huh.
a Chinese philosopher from a future empire, all these wonderful details,
Yes.
this South African king, which is clearly meant to be,
He's
a black African king,
right,
and
right.
also the star-headed vegetable old ones from the at the
That's an
Mountains of
elder at
Madness
the
are in
Mountains of
here.
Madness,
Yep.
obviously.
And
Yes.
it's kind of a positive, excited picture of a
Yes.
multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural society. And the thing that makes it work for him is, I think, the idea of sort of they become like this great big captive university colony, don't they? It's
It's
like a captive common room of colleagues all
it,
talking on this intellectual level.
It's so fascinating. I mean, there's so much going on there. Not only do you have this element of a strange kind of time travel, so you've got representatives of various eras just plucked mentally and collated here. So you've got communication from across time happening
Mm,
here, which is amazing. There's also that wonderful detail where Lovecraft's being very, very careful. He doesn't really, he doesn't stray into it too deeply and he doesn't obsess about it. But there's that detail about how the creatures are very careful not to change time because that happened during their earlier experiments and it caused disaster. So they're very
yeah.
careful about the way they manipulate time now. They always put the minds back when they're done.
I have to mention, I do wonder about the influence of this on Doctor Who, actually, because there
Actually,
are way.
this could, I mean, you could take this and you could adapt it into an episode of Doctor Who, and you wouldn't even need to adapt it very much, would you?
Well, the great race, as described, they do kind of sound like the Time Lords in the classic series,
Yes, very much
and
so, right?
but they also, the way they're described, they kind of sound a bit like Daleks as well. They kind
Hmm.
of sound
Hmm.
like organic Daleks physically. It does
Yeah.
make me wonder if some of the people that wrote those stories back in
Mm.
the 60s and 70s and so on, Robert Holmes and Terry Nation and so on, if there was some influence of this. I
It
don't
is
know.
fascinating. I mean, the Great Race ultimately, there is also it's kind of implied, it's ambient, but there is this sense that they're now almost caretakers, that what they're trying to do is maintain things. They're trying to prevent this other race, which we learn about later, from
Yeah, this is really interesting.
erupting. Now that this is where like Lovecraft deepens the horror, doesn't he? He keeps building up these layers. So at the beginning, you have this whole thing going on where Peasley, when he's in his remembrances or in his dreams, he has this instinct not to look down at himself.
Yeah.
He's got this almost like, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I think it's great, but there is this kind of like, yeah, we get it. We understand what's going to happen here, yeah. And there is this
Yeah.
great moment where he ultimately, he does look down and he realizes that he's been placed in the body of this Rugose cone creature. And his initial response is horror, obviously. I think he lurches awake from a dream, doesn't he? And he's screaming and so on
Yes,
and
there's a
so forth.
wonderful phrase he says, I woke half of Arkham with my screams.
That's brilliant. Oh yes, he's in Arkham at that point, isn't he? Of course,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is
Fantastic.
full on. This is full on Lovecraft mythos. Most of
Yeah,
it
of
takes
course
place
it
in
is.
Arkham,
Of
at
course.
Miskatonic University. We have,
Yeah.
the Necronomicon. All of it. Yeah, it's full
It's
on.
got everything, hasn't it? I mean, this is it's almost like
Yeah.
he's using this as a collation of everything, but doing it not in a heavy-handed way. That's the other weird thing about this story. It's very light. It's actually really easy to read, even though stylistically it does have all of those Lovecraftianisms that he's so infamous for. It's a rollicking read, this one. I don't know whether it's the three-act structure that helps, or the fact that each of the acts is such a different species of story in and of itself. In the early one, you have the mystery of what's happening to him. You have him sort of trying to work out where this lost time has gone and what it means. And then the remembrance, which that's my favorite part, I think, actually, when he starts to remember. And he goes into such extravagant detail about Lovecraft dipping into utopianism
Yeah.
in the same way that, like, Ursula K. Le Guin might have done. This is so interesting because no one, if you said, oh yeah, Lovecraft wrote utopian stories, people would be like, what? No, he didn't. Everything was grim and horrible and hopeless. No, he did. He
No.
absolutely did in the most
No.
sincere way.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the society that he describes, like you said, it's not malevolent in intent. These entities they're not cruel. They're just people, aren't they? They're just a species. They are just a society, a culture. They're not even cruel to the minds they hijack.
No,
They
on the contrary, they're
oh,
kind to them. If you can say that about,
yeah.
this sort of
The only
vast system of abduction that they do without compunction.
That's it. That's the only harm they cause is kind of ambient, isn't it? It's the fact that they cause disruption to the people's lives, and that's it. But there's no direct harm caused to them, and they are deposited into situations where not only can they operate, they can kind of thrive. They can have like a life within that dream state, which
There's also there's a kind of a intellectual elitism laced through this, because there's the
mm,
idea that they abduct intellectuals basically,
yes,
and the intellectual having been abducted back in the world of the great race
mm,
millions of years ago, is therefore, because they are an intellectual, a person of keen thoughtfulness, I think is the
mm,
phrase in the story. They're able to accommodate themselves to the situation and
yes,
find solace in exploring this alternate world. Having
uh-huh,
these conversations with the other minds, and writing their own account of their own epoch for the great
yeah,
race to put in their great library and stuff like that. It kind of is like a gigantic boarding school, isn't it? With all the feelings of domination and coercion, but
Mhm.
also being part of a community and
Mm,
learning stuff like that. There's some real ambivalence here towards academia, the university, knowledge and understanding
mhm.
and learning itself. That's what's being expressed here, I think. And that's, I mean,
Yeah.
again, you can't help but read this partly in terms of Lovecraft's biography, because he did have this incredibly ambivalent attitude towards academia, having wanted to be an academic, but
Mhm.
also being unable to cope with the life of being a
Right.
student. Which is something which comes back again in The Thing on the Doorstep, in his
Yes.
self-portrait,
Of
the
course, on a
character.
on a deeper level, I mean, he was obsessed with academic subjects, with
He
exploration, with
was,
reading.
yeah.
That was that. I mean, you really you can see that in every story he ever wrote. He's so interested in just subject, is everything. He's so interested in it, but at the same time, he has this fundamental fear of where human intellectualism is not just leading, but where it has already gone. And again, you get this in this story with the mentions of Einstein and the references to quantum physics and what that's going to reveal to us about the dimensions in which we operate and the finite nature of humanity. I mean, that's something, again, that's throughout Lovecraft. Humanity is just a speck in the eye of the universe. It means absolutely nothing. And within the greater span of time, I mean, he even mentions in this story one of the entities that is sort of imprisoned with him is it's an arachnid race from the last days of the Earth. So by that point, humanity is nothing. Humanity's been gone for X number of millennia, and there's probably no record of humanity's civilizations. Millions of other civilizations and species and things will have come and gone by that point. So there's that element as well. That's where academia ultimately leads, in intellectualism and exploration. It's that notion of knowledge that can drive humanity mad because it demonstrates that we aren't going anywhere. We're on the fast track to
Yeah,
extinction.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, that is the shadow of the title, isn't it? That is the
yeah.
horror of the story. It can be a little hard when you first read this, I think, to reconcile the somatic effect of the story, which is, I mean, I speak for myself. First time I read this, I found it very affecting.
Mm,
I was really affected by it. It was one of those experiences where it does actually kind of induce a feeling of dread as you're reading it,
yeah.
and at the same time, it's difficult in literal terms, in literal plot terms, to put your finger on exactly why that is, why you're feeling that,
Mm,
what it is about that. It's there's nothing really in the narrative that represents a kind of a horrifying threat. There is
right.
this idea of the other race, that the great race are enemies
Mm.
with, the thing that they're repeatedly referred to as semi-material things,
Yes,
and they're
plasticine entities,
plastic,
or
gaseous,
yeah.
semi-material. They seem to be able to sort of become immaterial and drift through other stuff. And I think that's actually really important, because I think deep in the structure of this story, there is a profound sort of ambivalence about materialism, and the way
Mm,
that the the intellectual work of the early 20th century had been undermining materialism. But that's
mm,
sort of, I hope we'll get to that. But yeah, you
mm.
have these creatures who they're represented by these black basalt towers, and they've been defeated by the great race and trapped underground under these gigantic trapdoors. So I mean, inescapably, they become a kind of a metaphor for the unconscious.
Yeah.
There's the threat of them, and of course, what he finds at the end when he does this gigantic long passage describing his descent
Yes.
down into the underworld, into the unconscious.
Mm.
Essentially, he's finding the evidence that these essentially he's finding evidence not only that the great race existed, but also that their enemies, the semi-material
Yeah.
race, that they existed too, and they might still be down there. Which is why
Right.
it's why he says at the very opening of the story, I urge no further exploration, because essentially we might free these things.
We might
But that's not
unleash them. Yeah.
yeah, that's not an imminent threat within the story. It's latent, but it's not imminent.
Mm.
And as I say, if you were going to adapt this into a film, what you'd do is you'd make the story as it exists the first two acts, and the third
Mhm.
act would be like those things get out from underneath the
Mhm.
trapdoors.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen. So there's no direct threat from them. There's certainly no direct threat from the so-called great race, because they're gone, they're dead and
Mhm.
gone, and also because they're not inherently malevolent. So it's
Right.
difficult to you get to the end and you think, why do I feel this sort of sense of dread? What is it that he feels so completely decimated by at
Uh-huh.
the end of the story? And of course, the answer is, as you said, it's time. It's the
Yeah.
vastness. It's the sort of vast howling wasteland of limitless time that we're in, that renders everything temporary and everything meaningless. And that's really
Yes.
it, isn't it? It's
It is.
humanity is just nothing. It's just
Nothing,
one
right?
in a succession of specks, all
Hmm.
of which are extinguished. And the only thing that you can do is, as the great race do, because they have the greatest technology. They are the great
Hmm.
race because they've conquered time. And what they do with it is they do this kind of mental piracy. But the point of that is to gather information, to put together this gigantic library of facts about all the
Mm.
things that have ever existed. But even then, at the end of it, all you're left with is ruins. Just
Yes, they're
everything
gone, right?
is essentially,
They're
they're
gone.
gone too. Their
They're gone.
libraries,
So.
gone, he finds one. He finds his own manuscript at the very end,
Right,
which is
right.
what proves the materiality, the historicity of his dreams and visions, which
Hmm.
is the big shock. Is that yes, it's actually all real. The shock of that, of course, is that he finds a document, but
Uh,
the real the meta shock of that is that that's it. You know, you might find a
right.
scrap of handwriting here and there, but that's all that's left of civilization after
Uh,
civilization after civilization, each one as meaningless and fleeting as the last.
there's a
It's this,
kind
and
of horror of
it's incredibly
impotence.
modernist. It's incredibly modern in its concerns in that sense.
Yeah, I mean that is absolutely it. Whatever immediate threats he draws, and there are a couple. I mean, there is the implication whilst he's scrabbling around that there is one of or more of the ancient
Yeah, because he hears
creatures.
things, doesn't
He
he? He
hears a
hears
whistle,
things. Yeah,
doesn't he? He hears
yeah, the
like a
whistling. Yeah,
whistling. But that's kind of by the by. That's an immediate sort of material horror to his well-being. That really isn't. It pales in comparison to the horror of him finding the manuscript. Because when he finds the manuscript, that confirms that the great race did exist and they don't anymore. So
yeah.
their guardianship, their stewardship is over. So that's quite terrifying because there's no way humanity is going to be able to cope against these things that are under the ground. I mean, they're going to swarm out and just destroy everything at some point. But it's also the fact that it confirms that not only humanity, but everything, consciousness itself is kind of arbitrary and meaningless. It's subject to these forces and phenomena that it has absolutely no control over, that occur almost randomly and arbitrarily, and there's nothing it can do. There is nothing, even the greatest, most advanced race, which consists entirely of mind, which is entirely abstract and has developed this way of projecting itself through time. The best they can do is record.
The best they can do is put together a gigantic library or
That's it.
museum or something like that,
Yeah.
and even that's gone. You know,
Right.
this is the end is so great because it's one of a network of these sort of paradoxical semi-negations all the way through the
Mm,
story. The fact that he finds his own manuscript from when he was a prisoner hundreds of
yeah.
millions of years ago, he has found something of that past still there. But the fact
Hmm.
that he finds it is what tells us that it was real.
Yeah.
And now that we know that it's real, the only conclusion to draw from that is that almost all of it's gone. That's the horror of it. We find out that it wasn't just dream, it wasn't just folklore. It was there,
Yeah.
but that means that it's not there now. It's gone. It's been
Right.
annihilated in the mists, in the wastes of time. Um, that that's really really clever.
It is
Um,
really clever. And there's also that other extra layer that you were talking about earlier, where this all serves as kind of a metaphor for mind. It's a commentary on consciousness and intellect and
yeah,
self-awareness. As the fact that he finds his own manuscript and has that revelation as he's descending into the subconscious. And
yeah,
that revelation, the seeking out of that revelation also stirs monsters of the subconscious as well, you know. And it's not
yeah.
individual. And Peasley's just like the vessel for this idea, which is a very Lovecraftian thing, you know, using his characters as vessels for ideas. You can abstract that out across humanity. It's collective subconscious as well. This is something that happens across cultures and within cultural systems and societies. It's there is this wonderful almost horror is abstract, isn't it? Horror is highly ideological and highly abstract. It's not about threats to the self. It's not about threats to individual well-being. It's about it's about threats that are just so much more profound than that. It's not even a threat as such. It's our state. It's our condition that
Exactly.
he's
Yeah,
horrified at.
yeah.
It's the
That
fact that we have consciousness and we can't really do anything with it. You know,
that it's
we can
kind
envision
of
any number of things. You know, we can record and we can make beautiful things, but ultimately, in any rational projection forward, it's impotent, isn't it?
yeah, and
It's
it's all
it's it's you know, it's all going to be destroyed ultimately.
It's all going to be destroyed, and the only thing that really makes any of it worthwhile is, as I think the story makes clear in its tone, the only thing that makes anything worthwhile is the life of the mind and the intellect
Yeah.
and the gathering of information and the creation of libraries, academic
Hmm.
work. As I say, it's a great, the story as a whole is this great big reflection of Lovecraft's ambivalence about academic
Yes.
work and the academy and scholarship and everything. But that's what makes it worthwhile.
Hmm.
But that's ultimately worthless in itself anyway. That,
Yeah.
and it's all personal, isn't it? It's all ultimately psychological.
Hmm.
And this is where I think the deep substrata of this story is this thinking that he's doing about the nature of materialism, and
Hmm.
that's why I think it's really interesting that he's writing a story with quite a long time span in itself in terms of its narrative time. The
Hmm.
story itself, in terms of Peasley's original episode or break or whatever you want to call it, happens in 1908, and
Yes.
the expedition at the end of the story is in the 1930s. It's in
That's right. So it's
1934
a
or something.
span of decades this happens
Yeah,
over, yeah?
and it's that particular span of decades as well, isn't it? It's the beginning of the
Right.
20th century, where you go right the way from the fin de siècle, the end of the 19th, the beginning of the
Hmm.
20th century, right the way through to the era of fascism, just on the edge
Right.
of the
On the
Second World
very
War,
edge of World War II,
taking
yeah.
in the First World War. And he mentions the First World War, and fascinating, he says, fascinatingly, he says the Great War came and it caused me to ponder history.
Yeah.
That's a key to understanding the story, I think. And I think there's all sorts of things in the story. The decision to make Peasley a lecturer in economics, as you say, a
Yeah.
teacher of
I mean,
political economy.
that is
Um,
very particular, isn't it? Because Lovecraft doesn't do that. There are
no,
loads of academics strewn throughout Lovecraft, but they're always of a sort of esoteric kind, aren't they? They tend to study ancient literature or
or they're just sort of, they're just academics. We don't get any further.
you don't, yeah, they're just academics.
That's
Yes,
just what they are.
that's it. They're a
Um,
Lovecraftian academic, and therefore you know what they're going to be learning. Yeah.
yeah,
At some
but
point, they're going to mention the Necronomicon.
yes, as indeed Peasley does,
He
although it's
does,
because
yes.
he's kind of forced to. Um, but he makes the journey from being a professor of economics to being a professor of psychology.
Yes.
He switches fields, and he switches fields from um, a, a a subject which has sort of a certain degree of indeterminacy about where it
Mm,
falls. Is it a science? Is it one of the arts?
right.
It's difficult to place it. Um, he switches that to a, s- a subject which is all about human subjectivity. Economics
Yes.
is, and he's very, when he wakes up from the fugue state or the amnesia period or whatever, from the possession, really, we should say, when
Mm,
he comes back to his body after he's been a captive and his body's been possessed by one of these ancient aliens,
uh,
he resumes the lecture that he was in the process of giving. And what he's actually talking about is the scientific turn in economics. And he's saying that Jevons, who's a real economist from the late
mhm,
19th, early 20th centuries, is typical of an approach in economics. It's sort of a scientific approach where he's trying to explain the commercial cycle, by which we mean, the boom and bust cycle, the crisis
right.
cycle,
Yeah.
what Marx devoted his entire political economic project to
Wow.
explaining. Jevons is explaining it in terms of sunspots. And this is real stuff as well. Jevons sort
Uh-huh.
of did suggest the idea that economic cycles are responsive to these great cosmic forces.
Well,
So,
wow.
which is kind of simultaneously crass material
Uh,
reductionism, but also kind of like economics as astrology. So
yeah.
you've got economics there in both its modes, kind of crassly material and scientistic, but at the same time sort of weirdly woo woo.
Yeah. And
And
that's a.
Jevons is one of the founders of the
Oh,
turn in economics in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, which takes it away from classical economics, stuff like Adam Smith and David Ricardo,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just to what's now called marginalism,
Mhm.
which is all about the idea that value is just based upon the subjectivity of the consumer. Things have value because consumers don't have one and they need one, or
Mhm.
they have two but they need three, and that the value of a commodity is determined that way. It's what's been called the psychological turn in economics, and that's, I mean, Beasley turns from
Ah,
economics to psychology.
yes, he
Implicitly,
does.
Freud and Jung are invoked. They're not invoked by name, but we have loads of stuff in this story that,
Yeah,
whether consciously or
it's
unconsciously, ironically enough, it's echoing the Freudian unconscious,
it is
echoing the
it's a
Jungian shadow. Go on.
yeah, it's a powerfully psychoanalytic
Yeah.
story, isn't it? But that is
Yeah.
fascinating because that dualism, which is echoed in every element of the story, like it's in its horror, it's in its psychology, it's in the notions of consciousness that happens here, where there is that distinction between the material and the abstract, the fluff and the crunch. It seems to be occurring throughout. It's like it is a very, I don't know whether Lovecraft
Well,
intended
as I
it,
say,
but
the big threat, the aliens that the great race fight against, are
Mhm.
specifically described as semi-material. So they're in a
Right.
sort of midway point between being material and immaterial.
And again, this
Um,
seems to be another reference to the other thing that Lovecraft is talking about in this, or just sort of edging towards, which is quantum physics, right?
exactly where I
Where,
was going to go next, because Einstein is specifically invoked,
right,
and he's turning time into a mere dimension. So you have general relativity being invoked, don't you? So you
yeah,
have kind of a cameo picture of this gigantic turn in the intellectual discourse of the Western world at the start of the 20th century, where social life and personal life becomes psychological in terms of your
hmm,
interior psychology. Space and time become relative because they're about your position. Things are
right,
literally, time and space bend and curve and change speeds and so on relative to each other depending on where you are. And you also
absolutely,
have
yes,
the same turn in economics, the great turn from the classical calculation of value based upon labor to the calculation of value based upon individual need and individual subjectivity. So you have this cameo picture of this gigantic sort of relativistic, individualistic,
oh,
psychologistic turn in the entire way in which the Western world was intellectually trying to understand the world at that point in time.
wow.
And
I mean,
it
wow,
ties right in with this idea of this ancient race who, because the weird secret about the great race, as they call them,
hmm,
is that they're semi-material too. We talked about
hmm,
how they didn't even evolve as the quote Rugos cones. They inhabited their bodies. They came down
yes,
from space and inhabited their bodies, and they're literally moving minds across time. They're semi-material too, and yet we
yeah,
get this gigantic disquisition about the material. Their architecture and the way their parks are designed, and their
yes,
ships, and their and
they're
their
cars, right?
and
They
their
have
car. And
vehicles
very,
and
very
things,
specifically, also, Lovecraft talks about their economic system and describes it
Yes.
fascinatingly. And remember, all the stuff I've been talking about, and now we're in 1934. He describes their
Right.
entire society as being based on a kind of fascistic
It's
socialism.
socialism. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's just that one line, isn't it? He doesn't go into
Yeah,
detail about it, but he doesn't really need to,
but
given the
his
era that it's set. The
his
resonance
his
is plain,
idea
isn't
of
it?
that seems to be that they have they do seem to kind of be racially conscious, don't they?
Mhm.
He says they have four groupings, but they have a kind of national or racial solidarity across groupings, which
Yes,
again
isn't
is
there?
it's
Doesn't he mention there's a caste of a ruling family group or something to that
yes,
effect?
yeah, there's decisions made by a ruling council. So that's an
Mhm.
oligarchy, right?
Yep, yep.
But the oligarchy is elected.
Mhm.
But they're elected by people who are considered qualified to
Right.
to vote based on their intellect and
Uh-huh.
their personality and stuff like
Isn't
that.
there also there's a eugenicist element to them as well, isn't there? He talks
Yeah,
about
they just
how
yes,
they
yes.
and I mean he couches it in very clinical terms. I believe he says that they are without malice, just done away with, aren't they? They're just killed, they're burned or something to that
They're without
effect.
malice, but they're without mercy as well, aren't they?
Without
If
mercy,
if
yes.
they're deemed to be, physically defective, they're just
Yes.
destroyed. So
Interesting.
we have a real sort of ambivalent picture about early 20th century modernity itself, I think,
Mm.
being
I mean,
built up in
there's
this
a
story.
absolutely, yeah, and there's even a very subtle commentary upon materialism and material comforts that are brought about by dwelling capitalism and whatnot. He talks about how the creatures they surgically and genetically alter themselves so that they're immune to pain. They
Yeah.
don't feel pain. And that's actually become a problem for them because he also points out that they don't necessarily know when they're sick as a result,
Yeah.
unless there's visual signs. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's
Well, I
great.
mean, just a,
That's a
it's just
picture of that's very definitely a picture of decadence, isn't it?
oh, it
Um,
totally, yes. I mean, it's a total, it's not something that you would like aesthetically associate with human decadence, but it's definitely there.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a beautiful detail. I thought it was, and that section, where he goes into such detail about how
But I
these
think
creatures work.
if you look at the Great Race as a sort of a reflection of the idea of the West or Western
Mhm.
civilization, at
Yeah,
its high point.
which they are
Um,
very coded as, aren't they? They're very coded in that way.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the what they do with their sort of raiding of other cultures is kind of just
Mhm.
inherently imperialistic, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh,
And they
God, yeah. And
have,
they don't think about it either, do they? It's just something that they do as a matter of course. Like you were saying earlier, they're very like the Time Lords, which another expression of this
mm,
same sort of imperialistic
yeah,
supremacy.
yeah, yeah. They consciously they are um, amoral, I would say,
Yeah,
rational. They would consider what they're doing rational. I
yeah,
think if they consider sort of political idealism or moral things at all, it's not mentioned. It just seems to be this completely quote unquote rational or scientific project,
yeah.
which of course is what they all say. That's
Of
what
course,
colonizers always do say
of
when they're
course.
raiding your culture for what they
Yeah,
want from it. They always
yeah.
say it's
And when
it's
they
for
are
everybody's own good.
acting in powerfully irrational ways and committing
Deeply,
powerfully irrational acts, right?
yeah,
Retrospectively, it's couched in
like
those terms, right?
locking their own dark reflection underground under trapdoors,
Right.
in the unconscious.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? We don't really know what their relation to these entities actually are. Everything we are given is from their perspective.
And they are,
So,
Peasley talks about how reluctant they are to even talk about it. He talks
mm,
about how scarred they are by their own contact with
right.
these things as well, doesn't he?
Interesting, right?
Yeah,
Interesting. It's curious, isn't it? Because I mean, Peasley gets to know this. Oh, well, he gets to know them rather intimately, doesn't he? You don't really know what span of time he spends amongst them, but it's again, it's this notion of time being rather plastic and malleable, right? He could spend like a small lifetime amongst them,
yeah, yeah. I mean,
and
because time is clearly relative in
exactly,
this universe.
yeah,
It's his body was occupied by one of these beings for 5 years. That doesn't
hmm
mean he was in their world for 5 years.
right,
Um,
right. I mean, the impression given is that he was amongst them for a very long time.
yes,
That's
yeah,
the impression I get from it. Anyway, he learned enough about them to understand minutiae of their culture and their politics. And he was even, I mean, there's that great sequence where I was even allowed to travel to a limited
yes,
degree, and he
yeah,
talks about the how they have no because their civilization has reached such a peak, they have no designs upon the natural world anymore. So the natural
that's
world is
right.
just
Yeah,
allowed to flourish. It's this
yes,
rampant jungle of he talks about lizards and reptiles and insects. It's a lush almost there's an almost Edenic quality to the world that he paints.
yeah. And also on the question of how long he spends there, it's very specific as he's recounting the folklore and the
Mhm.
mythology that he's trying to piece together. He talks about how in it's very essential to this entire sort of myth cycle that he's put together about these creatures, that before they came to Earth, there was no such thing as time. That is said very
Right.
specifically. They bring time
They
to
bring
Earth.
time with them. Yeah, so
Yeah.
these
So
creatures are they're quantum by nature, aren't they? They are like from the time before time, so from before the Big Bang.
well, they're kind of
From
inherently, I think, a picture of a dark reflection of Western culture or Western civilization with their sort of inherent colonialism and imperialism, their
right.
rationalistic intellectualism, and so on. Their, the you get descriptions of their architecture which irresistibly conjures up ideas of cathedrals and stuff like
Hmm,
this,
hmm.
and Western architecture. And you also get that very, and again, Lovecraft goes out of his way to do this, and this is very unusual in his corpus. He goes out of his way to set the last act of the story in Australia. Right? They find the
Right.
ruins in Australia,
They
and you
do,
get
yes.
several mentions of quote, the blackfellows on the part of
Right.
these archaeologists or explorers. And of course, he's talking about Australian Aboriginal peoples.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had this entire concept of the dream time, didn't they?
Mm.
Which is
Oh
the
my
time before
God.
time. Which is the time
Yes.
before time.
Oh, I
And
never clicked, but yes.
yeah. And they're treated with the disdain that you would expect in this sort of narrative from this
Yeah.
author, but at the same time, in a funny way, they turn out to be right about everything. Their
They
myths turn out to be right.
It is one of the more, yeah, yes, yeah, and also their cautions turn out to be correct as
Mm,
well, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Again, I mean, it's weird this story in that regard, isn't it? I mean, don't get me wrong, it does still have everything you'd expect from Lovecraft when it comes to describing anyone who isn't like white Western academic, but it's softer in this story. It has
Yes.
softened, hasn't it? And implicitly, I don't know whether it's conscious or not, but there also seems to be a subtext of questioning colonial attitudes in this
Very much so.
story.
Yes, I think very much so. Yeah.
And
But
that does echo what Lovecraft was going through, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's clear from his like epistemological writings at this time, not to mention his stories, that he was having doubts about his own very, I mean, like really ferociously racist colonial ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, the man was in a process of intellectual development, very, very late in life,
Mm,
for reasons that weren't entirely his fault. It took him a long
mm,
time to get there.
yeah.
But yeah, he was, and it reminds me of kind of the founding text of this sort of, and this is science fiction, I would say, as well as being
Mm.
horror and
Oh,
fantasy. It's a real
powerfully.
genre buster, this one.
Isn't
Um,
it? Isn't it
but
just? And
it's
it's kind of a rollicking adventure at times as well. It has this
yeah,
like
it's kind of
adventure
a
text quality about it.
yeah. Yeah, as I say, you get this wonderful sort of description of Peaslee making his way down into these
It's,
buried ruins, and
it's the
yeah,
the physicality of that that always gets me. He describes how, in order, because of course the creatures, the Yith creatures, are much taller than human beings, so he has to use the lock mechanisms on the drawers that the documents are contained in to
mm,
climb up to the right position in order to get, and it's very detailed and specific in like the physicality and the action occurring,
yeah.
which again is not something you get often in Lovecraft.
No, when Lovecraft gets specifically physical like that, you know that something interesting
Something's
is
about to,
going on.
well, yeah, I mean the
He's
big, I mean
invested.
the one that everyone remembers, the big action sequence in Lovecraft, is the flight from the hotel in the it's one of the Innsmouth stories.
The shadow over Innsmouth. Yeah,
Shadow over
yes.
Innsmouth. Yeah, that, I mean, that's
Escape from the
that
Gilman house.
Escape from the Gilman Hotel. That is a fantastic action sequence. Demonstrates
Yeah.
that Lovecraft can do this stuff. He can do the immediate, he can do the emotive, he can do like rather than taking this very broad perspective, this epistemological perspective that he takes on things, he can do this stuff as well. Um,
There's some very good stuff of the same kind, not as elaborate, but in another late great Lovecraft, which I love, The Whisperer in Darkness,
oh,
which I think is
I like that one a lot.
I love that
That's
one.
one
It's
of
one of
the
my
ultimate
favorites.
horror stories, isn't it, of
Yeah,
Lovecraft?
Yeah, again, really interesting one. I think it's a little before this. I'm not entirely sure, but
Mm,
it's same sort of general period. But yeah, I was going to say it reminds me of War of the Worlds. You have that
mm,
wonderful sort of paragraph at the opening of War of the Worlds, and as I say, it's kind of one of the foundational texts of this kind of science fiction,
mhm,
which engages with colonialism and so on. You have the
of
description of the
course.
Martians as watching us from afar, with intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic. That wonderful phrase.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's here as well, isn't it? As well,
Mhm.
and the same sort of ambivalence about that's what Wells is doing. He's reflecting our
Right.
West imperial culture in the Martians.
Yes, in
So
the
yeah,
crudest
in this,
terms, it's essentially, it's saying, well, what if it happens to you, right? So that's in the crudest terms. That's what Wells
yeah, I
is
mean,
getting at. Yeah,
and Wells did that very
yeah,
consciously, and he said
very
that's what he was doing.
consciously. Where I'm
Um,
not sure Lovecraft is doing it consciously here. It's throughout the story. It's there. It's
well,
implicit within the story, but I don't know how conscious it is.
that's what I'm going for because I think this story is doing something similar, but it's doing something more. It's doing it more sophisticatedly. To be honest, the
Yeah.
idea of somebody from a quote unquote rationalistic Western capitalist, again the specific invocation of political economy,
Mhm.
Jevons value theory, etc., the commercial cycle, a Western rational capitalistic imperial society, a representative of that being subjected kind of to the attentions of the same kind of society, but on a much larger scale, being
Right.
victimized by the same kind of system, but on a much larger scale. It's doing the same thing, but I think in
Yeah.
a much more sophisticated way than Wells is managing in the War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
And there's so much in this story that suggests deep thought about the subject matter.
Mhm.
All these very specific things that are invoked that are quite unusual um, uh, for Lovecraft.
Mhm.
The specific invocation of psychology, the specific
Right.
invocation of relativistic physics, the specific invocation of that specific turn in economics,
Mm.
Australia, the Aboriginal people, etc. I think this is somebody who is really working at a very high pitch of conscious, mature artistry. I
I think
think.
so. I think so. I think for me, I mean, this is definitely it's without a doubt one of the most successful of Lovecraft's stories, and that's not just because it's starting to chime more with the politics that I identify with. It's also just the way it approaches its subject matter.
It's
It
so
does it in this
questioning.
very yeah, isn't it? It doesn't like it's not doing the Nolan thing of beating you over the head with its
No,
themes and ideas. It just sort of invokes them in a very natural way. So the
yeah.
story is inherently psychological because what happens to Peasley is initially believed to be a psychological event, even by Peasley himself. And that's
Hmm.
what leads him very naturally from economics, which he happens to be. That happens to be a speciality into psychology. Yeah. I mean, one of the other great things
So just
Lovecraft does. So,
parenthetically,
yeah, sorry.
his turn to psychology as a subject being specifically linked to his family connection with his son as well. The only member of
Right.
his family that is left is a young man who becomes a professor of psychology,
Mhm.
and Peasley, the narrator, becomes a professor of psychology as a result of he and his son's joint investigations into
Right.
psychology, which stem from them both trying to understand what happened to him.
I mean, even innately there is an echoing of certain psychological ideas that, dynamics between fathers and sons, and the
Yeah.
son almost being the more stable of the two, taking over the reins, as it were, leading the way.
Well, this
That's
is what
very interesting.
that ties in with another thing that I think is in this story, which is the idea of and again, Lovecraft being Lovecraft, you kind of have to read this in terms of his biography. Um,
Yes.
I think this story is partly about childhood and adulthood, and
Hmm.
the thing that really makes that clear to me is that the repeated thing about in the dreams slash memories
Hmm.
that Peasley recounts of his time in the past world, the world of the great race.
Hmm.
He said, he says, I'm looking around and I'm seeing this, that, and the other. And he repeatedly talks about, I'm disturbed by the fact that I seem to be incredibly tall.
Right.
I know that these
Interesting.
tables are this high. I'm looking down on them. How can I be
Uh-huh.
looking down on them? Well, that's just growing up, isn't it?
It's
That happens
right.
to all of us. We've all had that experience of going back to a place that we knew when we were a child and
Uh-huh.
thinking, "Wow, it's smaller."
Wow, it's so small. Yes.
Yeah,
Wow, it's so different from how I remember it. Yes, absolutely. And that echoes what happens to Peasley on an abstract level, isn't it? It's this again, it's referencing it's a microcosm of the wider themes of the story, which is this development into reluctant adulthood and therefore reluctant knowledge.
yeah,
Knowledge that you can't get rid of. It alters your context completely. So you can't go home again. You can never operate in, for want of a better term, innocence again, right?
yeah. But
Um,
the thing is, it's reversed from Peasley's point of view. It's
uh,
reversed, isn't it? Because he's taller and therefore more adult in the
uh,
dream, in the past.
yes, in the
So
past, right?
he's kind of regressed from
Mm,
adulthood back to childhood. He's gone to adulthood and then gone back
gone
again.
back, and then he has that very, very, very reluctant self-discovery at the end, where he's forced back into a kind of adulthood, but doesn't have the context to deal with it anymore. I mean, there
Mm.
is a
And
very
it's
serious question about what happens to Peasley after this story, right?
well, and that moment is specifically linked to literacy and writing as well.
Hmm.
There's a real
Right.
fixation throughout this story on texts and books
Texts and
and
writing. It's
and
very
writing.
interesting. I mean, he even talks about how the great race physically write, how they do it, what
Yes,
appendages they use, and how they
yes.
store their books and why they do it. The language that they use. So interesting. And
And the
again, I mean, going back to
wonderful,
that notion of children, he even talks about how they procreate, which is in a kind of
yeah,
fungal way, isn't it? It's spores that they release into water, and
yeah,
only so many of them are cultivated, aren't they? Because they live for so long.
yeah. And that's, I mean, one of the texts from near contemporaneously is
Mm.
Huxley's Brave New World, which is talking about things like this. It's talking
Yeah.
about are we going to end up being a technologically reproduced species? Are we going to
Hmm.
clone
Hmm.
ourselves? Are we going to just be sort of
Yeah.
factory produced through an
Hmm.
impersonal asexual process?
Yeah.
But yeah, the wonderful section in the story when he's kind of doing this detective work thing, following
Hmm.
his other self around,
Yes, he's following the
and
footprints of his other self, isn't he? The
yes,
echoes of his other self. I mean,
and he
there
goes
are.
to the texts, the occult
Gosh,
texts that he consulted in his
yes.
amnesia secondary personality state, and he finds his own annotations
Uh-huh.
in languages that he doesn't speak,
Yeah,
correcting the ancient
wonderful.
texts and stuff like that. Yeah. So again,
It's wonderful.
it's the child
Exploring,
looking
right.
at the impossible knowledge of the adult that he hasn't become yet.
Yeah. Oh, again and again, married to that, this notion of time turned in on itself, of memory
Yeah,
turned in on itself.
yeah,
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, that other self. I mean, yes, within the mythology of the story, it is literally another self, but you can also read that in another way. Obviously, that it's metaphorically it's doing a Jekyll and Hyde thing. It's this notion that we can become alien to ourselves, that our states of mind can alter so profoundly in response to new context that we become alien not only to other people but to ourselves. Within that, the what the other mind does is fascinating, isn't it? Whilst it's in his body, it makes new social circles. It goes and seeks out occultists and maybe others who are subject to the same process. But what is
yeah,
it actually doing? Because it puts together a machine, doesn't it? It puts
yeah. There's a
together this strange engine, which is then taken away, which he sees other examples of when he's in the memory state.
yes.
But you never
That
really find out what it. does.
That might be the weakest part of the story
Yeah.
for me. I think that the little aside about the end of the possession, where
Mm.
you have the story about the thin foreign looking man
Yeah.
and the weird machine made of wheels and tubes,
Uh-huh.
and then it's fun. Don't get me wrong,
Mm.
but it feels it compared to the rest of the story, which is
Mm.
Lovecraft operating at a much more advanced level. It kind of feels like Lovecraft from a few years ago
Yeah. And
intruding,
it does kind of fizzle out as well, doesn't it? Because
it doesn't go anywhere. Yeah.
you don't really understand what the machine is for or why it was taken away, or even indeed what the overall intention
And you
of
don't
the possessing mind
you
was.
don't need it, do you? I mean, the possession happened without a
Yeah.
machine or a mysterious
Uh-huh.
foreigner. Why does the depossession or repossession
Require,
have to be?
yes, this thing
Yeah.
of, yeah, yeah. And it's almost, I mean, it feels like it's going to be a natural thing anyway, because there is that very subtle detail that the other Peasley, the possessing entity, tells his associates, well, there is going to be a change soon. So it
Hmm.
feels like it's a temporary possession anyway, just naturally. So you don't
Yeah, it's like a
need,
holiday, isn't it?
yeah, you are. It's going to come to an end.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's a sabbatical.
This,
It's the holiday that the academic takes
the academic
to get their
takes, yeah.
thesis written. Or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I never thought of it like that, but yeah, it's a strange holiday for
Yeah.
the creature from Yith.
But no, I think this might be Lovecraft's masterpiece for me, to be
I
honest.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been doing a lot of revisiting Lovecraft lately. I mean, I reread The Mound, and that I really
The Mound
enjoyed
is
that
great.
one, but it's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's
It's
bonkers.
very good, but
Yeah.
there did come a point where I got lost in the
Yeah.
mound, like, which is ironic because
Yeah.
that's what happens, isn't it? People get lost in the mound.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
but he goes into such incredible detail about what's going on, with regards to the weird alternate dimensions that are inside the mound and all the stuff that's going on around it. I did lose myself. It's a wonderful kind of loss. It's really interesting. There's a kind of like acid trip quality to that story, which I quite enjoy, I've got to say. But it doesn't, the elegance of this one and the composure of it, the structure of it, the way it's all very different as well, and yet fits together cohesively. That first section is very different from the second section, which is very different from the third section in terms of tone and feeling and ethos, but they
Yeah.
all fit together and work. And I think it has one of the most effective conclusions of a Lovecraft story. He's always going for this sort of like vague resonance horror in his work, isn't he? Where there's some grand revelation that shocks the protagonist to their core, unsettles them on a very sort of cosmic level. And sometimes he gets it and sometimes he doesn't. In fact, sometimes it can be a bit risible. He doesn't hit the mark. This
Yeah.
one really gets it, I think. This one he has that very fine balance, and it just chimes beautifully. It just works.
Yeah. And if you read it in the spirit, if you enter into the spirit of it, which you have to do,
Mhm.
with any text, if you
But very much with Lovecraft, I think with any of Lovecraft's stories, you need to understand what you're getting.
well, you need
Otherwise,
to,
it can be easy to dismiss him,
and
as
and
visible or as
people do as well.
Mhm.
People go in determined to be unimpressed, and if you do
Yes,
that, you're sabotaging yourself and the text from the start.
yes,
You go in
absolutely.
and to this, and you take it on its own terms, and you go with it the way you should,
Mhm.
with anything.
Yeah,
It packs a hell of a punch at the end. It really
yeah.
does, in quite an ineffable way. It's the kind of thing where you do have to think about the effect it's had on you.
That's what I
Um,
loved about it more than anything. You have to, because you don't really know when you finish the story why it's left you with this slightly cold feeling, this
yeah,
resonance inside of you. And
yeah,
you have to think about it. You have to go back. You have to. I mean, we spoke before we came on here about the horror babble reading of this story,
Yeah,
I've gone
love
back and
those.
listened to
Love
that.
those.
Oh, it's so good. Shout out to the Horror Babble channel. I'll put the links down
Absolutely.
below,
Yeah.
by because it's if you want to if you want to understand Lovecraftian mythos and what Lovecraft is about, but you don't necessarily want to read the stories, go to Horror Babble and listen to the readings. They are probably some of the best out there.
I think so. Yeah, and they've covered pretty much all of it at this point as
Pretty
well,
much.
along
And
with huge chunks of attendant stuff like
yes,
Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, Arthur
hmm
Machen. Yeah,
Ramsey Campbell is on there.
great
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah, really cool stuff. I've listened to that a couple of times, and it took me a few times to really start to get down to what the core of the horror here is. And I mean, it can be encapsulated in the word time.
exactly.
It's
Yeah,
about
yeah,
time and it's about ambient forces that we have absolutely no control over. What he's really getting at here is our conditions. It's our conditions as temporal creatures, like matter that's evolved to a state of sentience, but which can't go any further, which doesn't understand its place here or what the wider processes or purpose of reality are, if indeed there are such things.
and also that
Um,
we're all just trapped in history as well. We're all
yeah,
trapped in our moment. And again, like as
yes.
I all the way through this story, there's this wonderful sort of network of paradoxical self-contradictions. Like at the,
Mhm,
he finds the evidence, and the
mhm.
evidence shows you that all the evidence is gone. The wonderful sort of way in which, as they're on their expedition in Australia, and they keep on finding shit, and then they can't
Mm.
find it again because the sands have moved,
Yes, it
covered it
keeps
up again.
moving, doesn't it? Like there's that wonderful ambiguity at the end where they actually do go back to the site, don't they? And there's
Yeah.
nothing there.
And he finds the evidence and then he loses it again,
He
which again is
loses
a
it.
Craftian motif, but it's genuinely powerful here.
Yeah,
But yeah, just that feeling of being just trapped in your moment and
yeah.
having been briefly released from his moment.
Mm,
Peasley, I mean, it only goes to emphasize how completely trapped in his moment he is, and how completely trapped in all of our moments we all are. We all just
mm.
are completely prisoners.
In
We
fact,
are all captive
when
minds in
yes,
one epoch or another, you
and
know.
indeed in our own biologies, right, bouncing around inside our own skulls,
Yeah.
we
And
are
again,
creatures with the capacities of angels, but we're
yeah.
trapped in this rotting meat.
And the
Um,
paradox of him having been removed from his biology into a different biology, again,
yeah.
it only shows to emphasize the trappedness in
Yeah,
your biology.
in a way, I mean, the creatures don't intend it, but there is a real cruelty in that.
It's
They've
incredibly cruel. Yeah.
demonstrated that there's a dualism, that mind can move and can exist separate to to the material, to the body, and so it can escape. There is potential, it can escape, but we don't have the means. We don't know how.
Yeah. Again, a paradox that reinforces the thing it seems to undermine all the way
Yeah.
through this story. You get that over and over again. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so complex. It's such a brilliantly clever, complex story.
it
And
really is. Yeah,
I, I
and
get the impression,
it's undervalued and overlooked. This
yeah,
one,
yeah,
you
because
know,
you never hear people talk about this one. It never
people
comes,
talk
it's
about
always the Call of Cthulhu. They talk about, the Dunwich
At the Mountains of
Horror, At the
Madness,
Mountains of Madness, which was
which
the first one I read.
I like At the Mountains of Madness, but
Hmm.
it's never been a favorite of mine, and I don't think it's anywhere near as good as this. To be
It's
honest
nowhere
with
near.
you,
It isn't. It isn't. I mean, I really like At the Mountains of Madness because it was the first Lovecraft I read. And I tell you what, I
yeah,
didn't like it when I first read it. I didn't like
it's
Lovecraft at all when I
it's
first
a
read him.
it's hard going in places. I
Yeah,
have to say, At the
it
Mountains. Yeah,
is. It really is.
yeah.
I mean, it's got a very strong opening sequence, very strong opening, and then it kind of dips in the
It
middle.
doesn't half go on in
Um,
sections. You're like, bloody hell, can we?
I remember I was reading it for the first time, and there was a paragraph that I kept looking at the subclauses and counting them. And there's it goes on and on and on and on and on,
Yeah,
and it took me a long
I
time to get the taste for Lovecraft after that. It
I
really
was
did.
very lucky in that the first Lovecraft I ever read was Charles Dexter Ward, which I do
Also
think
one of the
is,
most readable ones.
yeah, it's one of the most conventional in its
Yeah.
outward form. So it's kind of like being eased into it a bit, but it is
Mhm.
also genuinely very good. It's still one of my
Yeah.
favorites. But yeah.
But this, I think
This
this
is
is the
splendid.
apex. This is the apex, I think. It's got everything essential about Lovecraft without it being risible and
Yeah,
without being alienating.
even his endearing flaws and eccentricities are here
Mhm.
to be enjoyed. You know,
Oh, they
without
are absolutely.
yes,
You know, when
yeah,
Peasley just lists these books, and all it
yeah,
just happens. It's a kind of expectoration in Lovecraft stories, isn't it? He's got this like pick where somewhere an academic is going to do that. They're going to start listing the occult books and the forbidden lore and tomes, and they just do it. It's just something that happens.
yeah.
But it's not off-putting at all here. It's actually kind of endearing, and I think it's because Peasley is an actual character that you
Well,
get
and
to know.
as I said right at the start, it's kind of motivated here in a way that it often isn't in other stories. You
Right,
know, he
yes.
is kind of engaged in a detective project of trying to piece together what his other
Mm.
self was doing in the
It's
5 years. So,
personal, isn't it? It's much
okay,
more personal here, rather
yeah,
than it just being abstract and academic or about like some occultist that wants to usher in the age of the great old ones or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. It really is. And I would, people who have been maybe put off by other Lovecraft stories or been a bit cynical about them, I would urge them to go to this one. I really would. I think they would enjoy it.
I'd like people who are maybe Lovecraft fans who are, you know, I don't want to be rude, but there are some people who are into Lovecraft who are very fixated on certain stories at the expense of. So, I mean, we talked a little
Yeah.
bit about the Mound, and I
Mm.
think we talked a little bit about this last time we talked about Lovecraft because we did in the Walls of Eryx, and
We
I was saying
did,
about how
yes.
my copy of the complete Lovecraft, it doesn't have any of the quote unquote collaborations in it. It doesn't
Uh,
have any ghost written I had to buy a separate book, you know,
yes,
the
to get that, yeah.
collaborations, and there's really some excellent stuff in there. The Mound,
Hmm.
the Curse of Yig,
Yep.
Horror in the Museum, you know, really very good stuff. In the Walls
Hmm.
of Eryx is
In the
I
Walls of
think
Eryx is a
absolute
really,
favorites.
yeah,
Um,
great story.
and he didn't just dash these off without without caring about them. He
Oh,
put a lot into some of those
he
stories that are officially listed
agonized.
as collaborations. But yeah, I'd like people who are maybe a little bit fixated on some of the most famous ones like
Mhm.
Mountains of Madness or Shadow
Yeah,
over Innsmouth
Court
to
of
think about.
Cthulhu.
Yeah, exactly. Which are great. I mean, I like all those,
Mm.
but maybe think about if you haven't taking another look at some of these more peripheral ones because I think. I mean, as I say, I think this one might even be the best thing he ever wrote, or
I
the best
do.
long piece that he ever wrote.
Absolutely. I do tend to find that these peripheral ones are more interesting. I like the music of Eric Zahn. It's
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I think that may equal this one for me because it's
yeah,
so off-piste.
yeah. Much
So
shorter.
off-piste for Lovecraft. It's such an unusual story. Um, but yeah, when he's good, he's very good. You really did. I think a lot of people come to Lovecraft on the back of other people, obviously, because, if you operate in horror, if you're into horror, then you're going to see him referenced all over the place. If you've read King,
But
you're gonna
yeah,
understand, you're gonna get references to Lovecraft. And I
he's
think
a
what tends to
legit
happen,
cultural phenomenon now, isn't he?
yeah,
And
he's
as
he's as
always with these things,
much
there's
he's as much part
upsides
of the
and
DNA.
downsides.
Yeah, he's as much part of the DNA of horror and genre fiction in general, let's be honest, as like Mary Shelley or Tolkien or whoever. So it gives you a broader context for understanding why these things are the shapes that they are, why there are certain preoccupations and images and things in them. But when you find these stories where he's firing on all cylinders, you understand why he was
Hmm.
so influential. Because
This
this
one
has
is
got
just
everything. This has got
this
everything you want from a Lovecraft story.
this is just bursting with ideas, and it's so complex and
Hmm.
mature in its treatment of them, and so questioning.
Yeah.
And as I say, as you know, there's so much. You know, it is still pulp literature. It is still
Mm,
it is what it is. It's Lovecraft and so on and so forth. But there's real literary complexity at work here that I think
absolutely.
you know
Yeah.
isn't appreciated.
No, it's
Um,
really, it's worthy. That's the other thing that tends to happen, of course. You tend to get this. this kind of snobbery that happens with regards to that distinction between the pulp and the literary, or that awful word which comes up these days, the elevated. It's like,
Mm. Yeah.
vomit, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Um, I just find that synthetic. I find that incredibly synthetic and dismissive. What tends to happen is stories like this one, which are incredibly smart and complex and insightful, tend to be just disregarded.
Yeah.
And that's a real
Yeah.
shame. It's a
Because
real shame.
people, some people anyway, they know the cultural image of the writer, so they think they know, so they don't really need to engage. And
Right.
I think certainly this and a lot of the other lesser known stuff, it really does pay closer, serious engagement.
Yeah,
It
and the
genuinely
fact that
does.
they bear analysis as well. I mean, this one we could go on for hours with this one. There is so much going on underneath the surface. The historical context alone is worthy of theses, right? You could write your dissertation on this.
Well, just the depiction of fictional architecture in the
Hmm.
great races world. You could
Oh,
write an entire thesis on that.
alone, that one element, and that's
Yeah,
before you even get into like the economic stuff that he talks about, culture. Right, you
he
could just
brings in.
focus on the image of the car. You could
Yeah,
focus on the
yes,
image of the
yes.
car that
Well,
occur.
and methods of transport generally. There's loads of
Right.
emphasis on transport, mechanical transport in this story.
Yes.
It's a repeated tick of this story, and
Yeah.
it's so interesting.
Steamers, boat,
Yeah,
cars,
airships.
airships. Yeah. All sorts of stuff. There's all
Yeah,
sorts going on here.
the references to theosophy. He brings up at one point the fact that the myth cycle he's invented
Mhm.
bears relationship to what he calls ancient Hindu myths, which form the basis of
Right.
theosophy. Now, in the early 20th century, modern Western sort of crank philosophers
Hmm.
appropriated Hindu ideas and
Uh-huh.
the earlier 19th century discourse of theosophy, and they started turning it towards what? They started turning it towards fascism. You have people like
Right.
Madame Blavatsky, who is a sort
Uh-huh.
of mystical, crank, theosophist, fascist thinker. And
Uh-huh.
that ties directly into this story's concentration upon the links between fascism and modernity and materialism. It's right
Absolutely. I
there.
mean, you have
The
it.
the idea of the idea of a root race as well. The
Right.
idea of a root race that ties directly into Nazi ideology.
It's
The idea
absolutely.
of the Aryans. Yeah,
Yeah. And married to that, you have the notion that these creatures are exactly that. They are a marriage of the metaphysical, the material, operating in a fascistic socialism where
yeah.
they have a eugenicist approach to their own genetic purity. And yeah, there's there's a lot going on there.
There's a
There's
hell of a lot going on in
there's
this.
there's so much. It's a brilliant story. I don't know how many ways, I really want to emphasize this because there's always like the caveats with Lovecraft, isn't there? Um, this is the one, I think. This one is fantastic. It's an unambiguously wonderful, brilliant story,
Yeah,
um, and
and it's
worthy
fun.
of your time. And it's fun. That's the other thing, right? I mean, yeah, that is often again at the Mountains of Madness. Bits of it are fun, bits of it really aren't. Bits
Yes.
of it you've got to spot. Bits of it,
Yeah.
I don't know whether he was trying to sort of like, if it's a case of like him trying to emulate the feeling of clambering through these icy passages and up these up these icy cliffs and whatnot. But that's kind of what it feels like sometimes. It's like you're sharing the experience of the characters. Um, but this is wonderful. I enjoyed every moment of it, actually.
Yeah. No, yeah, as I say, this might be the one. Yeah.
Mhm. Well,
Love
brilliant.
it.
Well, yeah. I mean, what else? What else can we say, really? Jack, thank you. But this is
No,
fantastic as
thank you for
always.
having me on to talk about it. It's a
No, in
pleasure as
fact,
always.
would you like to do a couple more of these? I mean, I've kind of got the bit between my teeth, especially with the horror babble stuff out there.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you'd like to do a few more of these, please let me know which stories, and we'll have a
I'd love
chat.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
brilliant,
I'd
brilliant.
absolutely love to. Yeah.
And before we go, of course, is there anything you'd like to throw out there?
Yes, I blog at Eruditorium Press. I've written about Lovecraft. I've written about
Hmm.
the influence of Lovecraft and the weird generally on the John Carpenter movie In the Mouth of Madness, for instance.
Yes, of course.
Uh, I'm on Blue Sky at Times Carcass. I have a Patreon where if you give me only $1 a month, you will get advance access to everything I do, which can involve things like this and anything I write before it goes up at Eruditorium Press, and bonus episodes of the main project that I do, which is a podcast called I Don't Speak German that I do with Daniel Harper about the far right. The only other thing that I particularly want to mention at the moment is a GoFundMe that I'm currently running to try to raise some funds to cover some massive bills that I've been slammed with recently. The biggest of which being the vet bill that I've been faced with in order to pay for some surgery to have my little cat, my little ex-stray adoptee, Emily, have her malignant tumors removed. So if anybody feels like bunging me a couple of quid to help me pay for Emily's operations, that would be very much appreciated. I know that there's an awful lot going on in the world at the moment that requires altruism. So, if you want to give to something more deserving, I completely understand. And of course, only if you've got it to spare. But or even just sharing the link from my Blue Sky would be lovely if anybody wants to do that. And that's me.
Yeah, please do, guys. It's all below, by the way. Links to all of this down below. As for myself, you can find me here on Exaggerated Elegy and over on the sister channel, Our Lives in Horror, which is having a new series. I'd love to do one of those with you, actually, Jack. That'd be fun. It's
Love
really
to.
is just, yeah, it's just a general, it's very like this. It's just a general chat about horror and we could talk about writing. That's sort of a general theme. Writing horror would be fun. That I'd really love to get your input on that. That'd be great fun, actually, because
I'd
I know you
love
do
to.
you dabble, don't you?
Yes,
Um,
I have. I have written. Well, I've written loads of short stories, most of which
mm,
are ghost stories or horror stories of some kind. Most of which are in a sort of semi-finished state.
mm,
I'm very reticent about putting things out there. They have to be,
mm.
in my opinion, properly finished before I let them out there. But I have published a couple of ghost stories, which I'm
Mhm.
very proud of. So yeah, I'd
Yeah,
love to talk about that. Yeah.
that'd be fab, actually. That'd be great because I'm doing like a new series of Our Lives in Horror at the moment. I've just done one with Kaylee Dobb, a mutual friend of mine, and Kit Powers.
Oh yeah.
That will be going up tomorrow, I believe, at some point. For my published work, if you go over to strangeplaygrounds.com, you'll find links to all of my short story collections. If you could leave a review for those, I'd be very, very happy, guys. That's, even if it's bad, we love reviews, horror writers, writers in general. It doesn't matter if it's bad, doesn't matter if you don't like it.
It all helps the
Reviews,
almighty algo.
it's all good. It's all good. Um, as for my non-fiction, actually, there should, fittingly enough, there should be very soon in the My Life in Horror series over at Ginger Nuts of Horror. There should be a very in-depth essay on At the Mountains of Madness going up
Oh,
reasonably
interesting.
soon. As
Yeah.
my first experience of Lovecraft, so it's exploring my initial reaction, which was not being able to get on with it,
Yeah.
and gradually coming round, acquiring the taste over time.
Yeah. While we're
Um,
plugging specific things, I'll just
hmm.
plug my forthcoming big essay on Clive Barker's Hellraiser,
Oh
which
yes.
will be up for my Patreon subscribers
Mhm.
at least a week before it goes up at Eruditorium Press. That's nearly finished, and I'm really looking forward to unleashing that one on the
Yes,
world.
I know you because we've discussed a little bit of it. I know your take on Hellraiser is really interesting. It's not. I don't think I've come across your particular interpretation of the material before.
Well, I
And that,
certainly hope it's
you know,
interesting.
yeah, very, very interesting indeed. So, guys, I know there are, Clive Barker fans out there, so go read, yeah. And for now, I think that's it for me. Jack, once again, this was great. This was
No,
really,
thank you.
really good fun. No, it's I always love these chats about like, literature and Lovecraft. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll be
It's
back
nice to have
soon,
something positive to talk about,
isn't
to
it? Isn't
appreciate
it
stuff. Yeah.
just? Isn't it
Yeah.
just? Yeah, it's necessary, I think, at the moment. It's very
Absolutely.
necessary.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into the more negative stuff at some point. There's
Oh
plenty
yeah,
of opportunity,
a good a good moan and groan
Mm.
is a lot of fun. But no, I
Maybe
think
we should. I mean, maybe we should do like. I mean, there are some Lovecraft stories I hate. There's a couple I would like. Maybe it'd be good to do that too. That'd be fun.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not all that keen on Shadow over Innsmouth. I know that's heresy, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm an
Not a
Innsmouth
huge fan.
skeptic, I'm
Yeah,
afraid.
not a huge fan. It's got that one good sequence. It's got the good
Oh
action
yeah, it's
sequence, and
yeah, yeah.
that's about it. Really. Well, until next time, guys. Bye.
Bye bye.